Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And we're lucky enough today to have my good friend Andy on the show with us. It's been a long time coming. I was going back through our notes and exchanges between me getting on your show and you getting on our show and all that. And I was like, dang, how long has it been, man? So, Andy, man, great to finally have you here.
Great to finally make it, and it's like a bottle of fine wine, right? You know, the wait's kind of worth it.
Although, yeah, make sure it's a fine wine because I tell you what, Miss Suzanne and I saved some wines.
Mm.
Don't save the table wines, folks. There's your
No.
lesson for the day. Some of them wines that we've had for about 25 years, and you stick the corkscrew in, and the cork just kind of disintegrates into the bottle.
Yep.
Yeah, no. So speaking of that, one of the things I'm always curious about with a guy like you, Mr. Engineer, Mr. Corporate, doing the hard stuff, saying, "All right, I'm tired of all this," or whatever it was. Why did you shift and say, "Thank you very much," from a very successful career that you had as an engineer in the airplane? I'll just call it airplane industry.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Jack Welch. in one word, right? So
Well,
a lot of
two.
the
That's two.
well, that's two words, but Boeing, my former employee, did a lot of business with GE. They made engines and navigational equipment that went in the cockpit and so forth, and we used to pilfer, if you will, their executives and leadership to come over and run our divisions, and they brought the Jack Welch system over with them to Boeing, particularly when it came to HR items. I got really fed up at the end of my tenure with the company. I had to take all of my team's positions, categorize them then into general categories, and then I had to sit in a meeting and justify my rankings of my team members with other managers at my level that had employees that were in the same categories. It was just a terrible process. I mean, they were trying to fit everybody into the Jack Welch bell curve kind of thing, where you have the bottom 10%, the top 10%, and then everybody in between, and everybody in between just gets a rudimentary average rating, even though they may have made significant contributions to your business within the company. And so people that really deserved better ratings didn't get them because we were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And to me, that's just not the way that you treat people. It's not the way I wanted to lead. I just really, as the years went by, I just really saw from a leadership perspective, and here we are now getting laid off because of 737 crashes and bad leadership decisions. I just was fed up with the whole culture and the way the company was going. So when I got my layoff notice, I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do what I can out in the world to try and change this such that we're leading people the right way, where we're bringing the best out of the people as opposed to being stuffed into a satchel. For lack of a better term, is we're going to stick you in the satchel and beat you from the outside into submission to fit our way, so to speak, and you get what you get.
You know, the military rating system was similar, and I'd never heard the Jack Welch connection to that. You know, the bell curve. because the way that we did it with the senior raters, not the guy right above you, not your immediate boss, but your boss's boss,
Yeah.
that senior rater. That is always with the Army has always been the critical aspect of whether or not you get promoted. And about 25 years or so ago, they changed it, and they did something, sounds like something very similar, but they would limit the percentage of top blocks that senior rater could give. So if you
Yep.
rated, 10 guys, you can only put 2 guys up there. And there's a whole math formula and things like that. So yeah, that became some real issues. And when you get to, units like I was in, where pretty much everybody is a top performer.
Well, it also gets into favoritism. I mean, the business that I had built and was leading within the company was a strategic business, from the standpoint that we were doing things out in industry that would benefit all of our customers, all of aviation, not a specific customer, from that perspective. So we didn't make a ton of money, but the impact of the work we did do had major impacts on other parts of the businesses within the company. But because of the bottom line numbers that we were making, we didn't get the resources I would have really liked to have had, and we certainly didn't get all the attention of the people you're talking about, Otis, that were 2, 3, 4 steps above me. Because the bottom line numbers, nobody's thinking strategically. We're only thinking about, okay, what are the dollar signs you're contributing in my ability to show Wall Street what we're doing.
Right.
I didn't get any credit. I didn't get any credit from the other businesses for the work that my team was doing, that helped them with their customers in any way.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like, and we've talked about this before with a lot of issues, as businesses get larger, especially, but that you're trying to systemize what is really at its core a human component. And I think there's always an interesting way to flip that and I literally think back to a management class where we talk about bureaucracy and everyone laughs and you go, okay, no, there are good things here. And I'd like to do that a little bit with this. Andy, were there any pieces or glimpses into the knowledge from that perspective that you say, okay, hey, that's right, they executed it terribly, I don't agree with how they implemented it, but I could see where they're coming from, or any insights there? Or is it really just a negative example of what not to do, right?
It was sort of left hand, right hand. So when Boeing merged with and integrated with McDonnell Douglas, who was based out of St. Louis and much more into the military side as opposed to the civilian side when it came to aircraft, and hence was the attractiveness to Boeing because they wanted to expand their military business a lot larger, right? Well, one of the assets that came with that merger from the McDonnell Douglas side was this beautiful leadership facility on the northern side of St. Louis, right on the Missouri River. Was a lot like a hotel in terms of the footprint and the shape, and you had your own hotel rooms. The food was incredible, but you were in classrooms 8 to 10 hours every day. I mean, your head was just swimming when you walk out of the day, and you'd have to go back to your computer with your emails because your regular job's still going on, and you just I have no energy to do these things. But they were great courses. They were difficult to get into because everybody wanted to go to them. So they had a great training program and a great training facility to train leadership and managers with, and it was considered a great feather in your cap if you were able to go to one of those classes or courses. So on one side you had this great training program for leadership, and they forced their high-level executives to go there. I don't remember what the number was, 2, 3, 4 times a year, and go down and sit in front of classes and talk about leadership from a Boeing perspective. And that was a requirement. It wasn't, and they were, if they didn't do it, they were, got knocked on the head because of it. So I was able to participate in some great conversations and presentations that very high level executives at Boeing came in to do. But you had that on one hand, and then on the other hand, you're putting these systems and so forth together that sort of counteract against what you're really doing well on this other side.
Yeah, exactly. That was my thought. It sounds like great training, but terrible measuring, which it's a really weird way to run a system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and I've seen that in other organizations too. It's like you've heard me talk about the values of an organization,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a really beautiful piece of glass with etched calligraphy in the break room, and nobody knows what they are, because first off, you can't read the calligraphy. It looks really pretty though. But it's that sort of sense. Here's our values on the website, and then here's what we're really doing over here. Is that part of what drove you into creating Generate Your Value?
Yeah, I mean, the leadership that was taught at that organization was sort of the surface level nuts and bolts, when it comes to business type leadership, but there wasn't any coursework or anything about self leadership, which is what I saw as the big missing component out of it. Because to me, your leadership style, your ability to lead is part of the essence, if you will, of your self-leadership. Mm-hmm. And so, when we're giving leadership in operations and leadership, on the financial side and sort of the nuts and bolts, I don't want to diminish that. That's important things, but where are the training and courses? I was fortunate enough to get high enough in the organization that they gave me an executive coach, which helped. In what we did was work on my self-leadership in an effort to then be a better leader within the company. But it was only accessible to those that had rose up through the ranks. In my opinion, if you have somebody that you've identified start getting into a leadership role where they have people reporting into them or leading a business, that should be an automatic kind of training that you give them. Start at the bottom in the grassroots of leadership and management within the company and start working on those self-leadership pieces to have the right proper foundation to which to build upon. You'll get much better and more effective results within the company, and I just didn't see any of that. That's what I did with my mentoring. People come and ask me to be a mentor for them within the company, and where I got my biggest fulfillment in my 22 years with the company was doing that kind of activity and helping somebody with their self-leadership, because there was a vacuum there that the company wasn't offering. Down in the middle management kind of ranks.
Yeah, leading yourself is always the first step. I always talk about, you got to know where you're at on the map before you can start to plot your route to where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And that's part of leading yourself. What about this executive coach? What did you learn from that executive coach? It's kind of like still in your back pocket that you whip out every time, multiple times a week or whatever.
It's affirmations about who I am in this world. So I grappled with self-esteem problems, high school, college, early 20s. I talk about this regularly on my podcast and so forth. And It was the baggage I brought into my first marriage, and went in through a lot of therapy, reading self-help books, anything I could latch onto to help me. I basically said to myself, this is not the life I want for myself. I've got one shot at this, right? Not the life I want for myself, so I need to work on myself to change this. I need to take ownership, if you will, of my life. So I had done a lot of that type work early in my life, but when my time with the executive coach was probably in my mid 40s, late 40s, and still had some things that were hanging around that I needed to work on. And we went through a 360 review process where we gathered comments about my leadership, above me, below me, to my sides, and so forth, that we used as feedback to help conversations and so forth moving forward. So to answer your question, Otis, what I pull out of my pocket is just the affirmation statements that, every day, okay, this is who I am in this world, this is my why, and I'm going to live it out loud today.
Awesome.
How did you turn that self-leadership lens on again as you were going through this? Because you talked about having those affirmations then, and then it's still a journey. I think a lot of people can get stuck to where it's like, hey, you gave me the toolkit to conquer this challenge, and then 5 years down the road, hey, that one's done, but now this new challenge is coming. How did you flip that lens on again?
To me, it's just a life journey. There is no such thing as perfection, right? We all strive towards perfection, so it's a matter of going through life on that journey. It gets easier and easier and easier from the standpoint you have those tools and you're using them every day. I mean, think of a carpenter from the day he first pulls out his hammer and his nail and he's hitting his thumb and whatever else, but as he goes along using that same tool, the hammer hasn't changed, but he just gets more and more confident in using it through his years. That doesn't mean he stops banging nails into the wood, but he's able to just quickly put up a 2x4 somewhere because he's confident in it and he's used to it. He's been on that journey with the hammer, so to speak. And it's the same thing with life, knowing those life hacks and just keep using them day after day after day. They just become ingrained into what you do and who you are. It doesn't mean that the problem per se is totally eliminated, but you get so good at it and become a master, so to speak, at it, that it just becomes natural.
I'm just thinking, having a piece of paper hanging on my wall that says engineer. What's some engineering mindset processes that you still, have helped you create and be successful with Generate Your Value?
Well, I'm a Georgia Tech grad, and we had a saying around Georgia Tech that was, take your givens and solve. Right? So first step is to understand what are your givens, what's around your environment, what are the things that you do know. That's your starting point A, so to speak. And you've got to fix a particular problem, solve it in some way, which may be I'll throw a piece of wisdom on you. I stood with a piece of parchment in my hand that was that degree from Georgia Tech, and my dad was a corporate executive in sales all of his life. And he stood there staring at me in my eyes. I had a smile on his face. He had a slight smile, and he said, Andy, there's one thing I don't want you to forget. Just because you can build it doesn't mean you can sell it. And
that's great.
I've had that running in my head my entire life, from that perspective of, okay, I have to, in business, I have to reverse engineer it. So First thing I've got to do is go figure out where there's a need, a want, or a desire out in the marketplace, either known or unknown. Now, the world might not know they need something, but the reality is they do need this. They just don't know it yet. And that's the destination. And then you have to go look around your environment. That's your, this is where we're at today. That's point A. Now, how do we get ourselves from point A to point B? And, part of my platform with Generate Your Value is trying to highlight to people how business and life seriously overlap. So you can take everything I just said and make it about your life. If you're going to generate value in this world, where are you going to go generate it? Where are the wants and needs in your life and in the world? And what are your knowns? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where are my fears? Where are my passions? And how am I going to take those things and solve? You could take an engineering approach, if you will, to your life. And how am I going to take those givens and solve that's going to allow me to generate value in the marketplace, in my relationship with my spouse, in my relationship with my kids, in my community, at my church, wherever you're participating in life. How is it I'm going to generate value? And that value is there because there's a want, need, or desire out of human beings or businesses there for you. And that's what the engineering approach, if you will, what I learned my time at Georgia Tech and beyond, how you can take an engineering approach as long as you understand just because you can build it doesn't mean you can sell it kind of mentality. And go out there and make an impact in the world.
It's really interesting hearing you go through that. And Dad, maybe you have the same kind of perspective from your engineer days, but I don't think I've ever heard you put it that way. But I think the interesting comparison that comes to mind is when you talk about the SF approach, Dad. It sounds a lot like that. It's a lot like what I talk about in development economics, the ABCD, asset-based community development. Figure out what you got. If you don't know your current situation, you can't move forward. Figure out what you got, figure out which direction you want to go. And if you can do that, I like to think of it as, you're building a bridge across a river. You start on both sides, you know where you're going. It's like, okay, now we can build the bridge. If you don't know where you're going on either side, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think that's an interesting piece there. But then I think the question is, how do you properly identify the goals then, Andy? And maybe from a coaching perspective, how do you help somebody properly identify those so that, they got their situation, they got their givens, they know which side, they know how to build this side of the bridge, but they don't know where they're going just yet.
Yeah, and I think that's where you start going inside and dealing with the non-tangible, physical kind of things, right? What do you want? But how do you define success for yourself? What do you want?
Isn't that such a great question?
Do you want the Lamborghinis and the houses and the yacht? I mean, is that what you think's going to bring you joy and happiness and success in your life, or is it something different? I'm not sitting across the table here from you to judge that. Mm-hmm. I only judge myself, not you. So what do you want? And I'm going to help you figure out a way to go after what you want. Now, you may get there and go, wrong. And what was that guy's name and number again? Oh, yeah, Andy McDowell. Hey, Andy, remember that conversation 10 years ago? Yeah. Wrong. Okay. What did you learn? What did you learn in those 10 years that changes that picture for you now? Let's talk about that.
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show. If you're enjoying this conversation, then make sure to share it with other lifelong learners in your life so they can enjoy it too. Stay up to date with the show on Facebook and Instagram at Cam and Otis Show, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you're the first to hear about new episodes and other special content. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, that's so true, and I love it. And I always add in the fact of because what do most people do when they're going through that exercise? They're like, I don't know, maybe this, maybe that. And it's like, a friend of mine, actually, here's another one of those funny things. A friend of mine taught me this technique: is you have them pull out a coin, you flip the coin, and you have them, option A is heads, option B is tails, and you have them flip the coin and then catch it and cover it up, and then you ask them, what do you want it to be, before they even look at it. And then just take the coin and put it in your pocket. It's an amazing little technique. But what that leads to is, what could be worse than, or worse is probably not what could be better than choosing one of the two things you think you want and going towards it, and then finding out, no, maybe not. As opposed to sitting stagnant and not doing anything in your life, being, well, woe is me, I should have done this, should have done that. I wish I would have taken this course in college. I should have taken that job or done this or said that. Goodness gracious, that ain't a way to live. How about walking towards something that you want? You may find out, just like you said, 10 years down the road, you may get it, right? You may have that Lamborghini in the garage. You may find out that Ford F-250, yeah, it was okay. It's not like all that. But it's a heck of a lot better to live that way than it is to not do anything you want.
But yeah, it's the... Go ahead, Andy.
And that's why I use the analogy a lot with my clients about the rubber dinghy and the motorboat, right? So are you in the rubber dinghy with a set of oars in the ocean, and life is just pushing you around because you don't really care about things, right? You're in your rubber dinghy, maybe with a book or a radio or whatever. You're just hanging out, and the world is just kind of pushing you wherever it wants to take you, kind of thing. Or do you have intention in your life with some kind of goal, where now, by that act of having intention, you're now a motorboat. Your fuel tank is full of love and passion, and now you're on a journey. And you may be in the Mediterranean aiming for Rome, and you're on the way to Rome, and you learn something about yourself or about the world, about life, and go, Rome's pretty good, but I like Naples better. And you get your steering wheel and you turn it to the right. You're still going, still on your journey, but you turn 15 degrees east to start heading towards Naples. And then you go further down the road and go, nope, Sicily is it. So it's about learning as you're going on the journey about yourself, about the world, and so forth, that might change that destination per se, and you just course correct. But you're still moving, you're still learning, you're still growing. You're not in the dinghy still getting pushed around by the ocean.
Exactly. It's what I was going to say was, it reminds me of a coach, one of Coach Otis's rules of threes when coaching rugby. Loves his rules of three, and this is one I still coach to this day, which is, whenever you get up from the ground, get up from a tackle, whatever it is, you finish with something. The first thing you need to do is decide where to go, and then take 3 hard steps, a sprint. Start your sprint there. Even if you don't sprint the whole way there and you wind up jogging, at least you started. Even if you change where you're going, even if you change what action you're deciding to take, what work you're trying to do, you can still adjust. But it's that action that matters. Because the key, to take the rugby example, and this is really what you're talking about, of sitting still in the ocean too, because you can get pulled away by the waves. But if you don't ever take those first few steps, then you get left behind by the action. Life is going to leave you behind. And if you get left behind, then now you're playing catch up. Even if you make the right choice, but you don't take those first 3 hard steps, now you're behind. In the rugby example, you're not going to make that tackle because you're late. And it's really that simple. You've got to be able to take those actions, because life is going to keep moving, whether or not you take those 3 steps. So it's really just a choice. That's the way I look at it. It's one or the other. And if you don't take those 3 steps, you're going to have a worse outcome just about every time.
Yeah, and it's that philosophy, Camden. Whenever I work with a startup who's writing a business plan, I'm like, don't bring me 100, 200-page business plan. Bring me 10 pages, with just the basics and the fundamentals, and we're going to go on this journey and learn as we go along, and we'll add to the plan as we go along. Because while you're sitting there for a year or two writing 200 pages, the world's passing by, the marketplace is changing, and now you're going to have to go back and maybe even rewrite the whole thing, or maybe just a chapter. I don't know which, but the art of building a business is learning as you go and validating or invalidating assumptions.
I think there's an interesting, and I'm not sure if dichotomy is the right word, but there's something I'm noticing as we're going through this and kind of bringing a full circle of our conversation of the problems that you saw, Andy, with Boeing and with the new management and those type of things. I kind of had this light bulb moment. Well, you're the engineer. You're the one who's creating the systems. How are you the one who goes in and then says, no, I need a little bit more art. I need a little bit more of the human component in the systems. Was that a tough transition for you? Was that something you naturally had? Because, and again, not the engineer here, but y'all ain't always the most personable people. Sorry to both of you.
Well, as I mentioned to you in the green room, this is like my 55th interview on podcast. The reason for that is because I naturally have both left brain and right brain skills. Mm-hmm. So I'm a photographer, I'm a singer, I'm a guitar player. I have that creative, artsy-fartsy, if you will, kind of side that gets into enjoys the emotional, if you will, side of life as much as the engineering, logic, mind-based kinds of things. So I can sit in a strategy session with you and think creatively and out of the box and those type things, and then at a flip a switch go, okay, but logically speaking, here's where our challenges are going to be tactically in making that happen. And that's why business strategy was a high strength for me in my leadership career, because I'm both left. I was naturally born with left and right brain skills. That's atypical for what the majority of engineers have.
I'm just visualizing Andy with a client and a whiteboard and going, hey, do you have fuchsia and a light yellow so that I could draw up on the board, right?
Mm-hmm. I was a very visual person, and in my office was always a huge whiteboard, and we get talking on the subject, you usually find me on a whiteboard with a marker, writing things out, marking, doing drawings or whatever. Yep.
That's fun, and that being able to see a vision and visualize it. How do you translate that for your clients so that your clients, can create their vision for what success is?
It's a major component of self-leadership, right? It's about looking at both sides. It's looking at the logical side and the emotional side, right? So I took a business strategy tool. It's called a SWOT analysis. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And what I do with my clients that want to try and figure out their why in life and build a life strategy for themselves, SWOT analysis and business strategy is about trying to figure out where you're at. Mm-hmm. That starting point. I changed the word opportunity to love and the word threat to fear. So now we're bringing in the right side, emotional side, on the bottom half of that rectangle. Strengths and weaknesses is kind of the logical side, right? So what skills and talents do you have that you're really strong at? That's kind of the mind logical side. I'm good at X, Y, and Z. Okay, what do you have problems, issues, concerns about in terms of your skills, talents, and behaviors? That's going to go on the weaknesses side. That's kind of the mind. But love and fear starts getting into the right brain emotional side. Okay, where's your loves? Where's your passions? What makes you happy? What makes you sad? Kinds of things. And what kinds of things keep you in your comfort zone? Where's your fears? You know, that brings in the emotional side. So we're bringing both sides of the equation into this analysis. And when we put a life strategy together, we're going to look at both sides. You know, the upper part, you can go get training classes. There's things that you can do here on this earth, so to speak, that can go strengthen strengths and strengthen weaknesses kinds of things. But the bottom part, that's where the self-leadership comes in, and that's where we need to talk about you have any traumas in your life or things that are causing these items to be in these squares, and how can we minimize or even eliminate the stuff in the fear side, because you're getting out of your comfort zone, getting comfortable with it, sort of what we were talking earlier in our conversation about, with the hammer and the nail, such that it just becomes second nature, and you can move it over to the love box because you've got confidence in it. It's not an issue for you anymore, and you may have even actually found that you actually enjoy it. That's what happened to me with the guitar. I've only been playing the guitar 6-7 years, and I just decided I'm going to go buy a $250 guitar, spend 15 minutes with it every day. Am I fearful? Yeah. Am I going to sound like crap? You bet. But by gaining the confidence and spending time with it every day and allowing it to be a journey, it's no longer a fear. I just show up at church on every Sunday now. They hand me sheet music, and away I go. But I had to get out of my comfort zone. I had to address that fear that I've never played guitar before, and I'm going to sound like crap. But I knew it was about the journey and moving that dot that's in the fear box and moving over to the love box, and I absolutely love playing the guitar now. But if I was scared of it and sitting in my comfort zone, I would never be where I am today.
I love what you talked about of living in that fear and pushing through and how you get more and more comfortable. I want to throw a thought experiment out there to both of you, and Andy, you can go first on this. Then right. Dad, I'd like to hear your thoughts of. Should you be going towards the fear? Like I'm picturing the Marines commercial where it's, some people go away from the noise, some people go towards it, right? Should it be, hey, you are always going towards the fear? Because I think of the War of Art and resistance, and you should go towards resistance. Mm-hmm. But I think fear is a little different. If you're constantly going towards fear, I could see some negatives there. So in the hypothetical of, yes, you are always going towards fear, what are your thoughts on that, Andy?
I think you should always, fear to me is a flag. It's a marker that there's something there in your life that's limiting you from your potential. So I'm not saying I have a fear of jumping out of an airplane, and you should immediately just go to the airport today, jump out of the airplane. Maybe you right. want to go take a training class in it just to understand up in the mind a little bit more about what this is all about, and take baby steps to it before you actually do it. And maybe in taking those baby steps, you're like, yeah, I might eventually be able to get myself to jumping out of the airplane. I just don't know if I'm going to enjoy it. Okay, then don't do it. Right? But at least you took some steps towards the fear to learn about it some more, not to make it as big of a fear in your life. And to understand it better. I think sometimes people get stopped because they don't understand it, and they have this mental picture of what it is. Yeah. And they're making up stories in their head, and that stops them in the tracks, as opposed to going and doing some investigating, ask some questions, try to understand and get comfortable with it a little bit more before they make that decision about whether they should not do it or not.
Well, I'd say fear is generated from the unknown. So like you talked about the, jumping out of an airplane, the way the Army does it, the military really, because there's only one school, it's 3 weeks of training, and those first 2 weeks is ground week and tower week. So all you do during ground week is jump off a box and learn how to fall for the first 3 or 4 days. Then the next couple of days, you're in a fake harness and you slide, I think slide for life, and you slide down this. So now you're practicing steering the chute. And then the second week, Tower Week, it's a, think Six Flags Over Texas ride. It is quite literally that. You're attached to a chute. They pull you up a 250-foot cable and release it, and you float down and get that experience there. And then finally, in the jump week, that's when now you actually jump out of an airplane. So the whole process is mitigating the fear. Not to say that it's not still there when you step up, because man, it's an adrenaline rush like you would not believe. When you step up and hang out the door of a C-130, which I've done many times, and there's no better rush than that. But when you do that, now you can step out that door because you know this, and this. And your mind is filled in the blanks. My go-to on this is our caveman brain is fearful of dying, right? We have a survival instinct. So if I am afraid to leave the cave because there's a saber-toothed tiger on the prowl, that's fear. But Andy comes back from hunting and says, no, I haven't seen the saber-toothed tiger. I've been out all day. He hadn't been around. You're good to go. And I'm like, okay. I have knowledge about what's going on out there. So when I run towards fear, and by the way, the Marine commercial is running towards the sound of gunfire. We used to say that back in the day. But that is it. It is overcoming fear generates courage. Courage overcomes fear. And the more courage you have, you can create more courage by having more knowledge and confidence in your action. You're mitigating the risk of the danger by doing that.
That was my next point, was about risk management.
Yeah.
By going out and getting the knowledge and information, you're reducing the risk.
Yeah, exactly. You're filling in the gaps, right?
Yep.
It's and back to leadership. When you fill in those gaps and you mitigate the risk, your job as a leader is to make the decision. Okay, is it now an acceptable risk? I just spent 2.5 weeks practicing how to jump out of an airplane, how to steer my parachute. That's a joke. And how to land. That's a joke also, because yeah, there's very little steering, and landing denotes that's landing, But in principle, but so now I have that process, and because I have that process, I've developed courage over the unknown, the fear, because there's still gaps, right? We can't have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen in the future. So all we can do is mitigate the risk.
It's the same thing we talk about coaching, like collisions in rugby. You have to learn where to put your body so that when that's coming, you just naturally go there. Because if you start thinking in that situation, then you can run into problems. I think, to your point, Dad, it's the same type of thing in business. And I don't know the specific quote, but I know Marcus Aurelius talks about it a lot in meditations of, disarming the pain of the future by figuring out what it's going to be, disarming the surprise, because the surprise is usually what hurts you the most, right? And I think that's what it is. If you go into your business, whatever it is, whether it's a human component or something, more systemized, when you go in and you anticipate the surprise, right? You anticipate those pains, remove the surprise component from it, and then you go and you start to put it together of, hey, when that does happen, I know what to do. I keep thinking rugby examples, but I know when to dip my shoulders. I know when to launch my arms forward. And I know when to get those things right. You can build those same kind of repetitions inside of your business, so that when something goes wrong, when there's an interruption to, software you're using, when you have a sales issue, customer service issue, whatever it is, you build those systems out, and then the better you get at it, the less fearful it becomes, and, the more effective you're going to be.
And I'm going to put a plug in here. You accelerate that success by hiring a guy like Andy, who comes in and says, "Hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's what I've seen. You have all this experience and knowledge. You bring in a guy like Andy, and then I don't have to learn from the school of hard knocks.
Yep.
I got Andy, who's like, dude, not only have I had a couple of knocks upside the head, but I've been around other businesses that have had that."
Yeah, at Boeing, we did three things with risk. We had, whether it's a project or an overall business or whatever it was, A, identify what the risk is. B, evaluate the likelihood of it to happen. And C, evaluate what the impact is to the business. And as you went along with the business or the project or whatever, that particular risk might move around that chart as you got more information along that journey, so it's that as you understood things better, the impact and the likelihood might decrease.
So that risk, and that's a great point to share with folks, and understanding the risk in those ways. What's the biggest risk, if you will? That's kind of a weird way of putting it based on how we've been talking about it. That you've seen, whether it was Boeing when you were there, or a client, and you're gritting your teeth. I mean, you're like, oh geez, I sure hope we're right on this.
I don't know. To me, in life, the biggest risk is regret. Staying where you're at, staying in your comfort zone. I mean, my whole Boeing career, I was working really hard to try and get the culture and the thought process at Boeing to change from one of an airplane company to an aviation company. And to get in the other parts of the ecosystem, as we called it, within aviation. And I have regrets that I wasn't able to stick around long enough to see that come to fruition. B, the company may be regretting that now with the way things have happened in the last 4 or 5 years. The worst thing I can have, and what drives me every single day, is I don't want to be laying on my deathbed with regrets. My definition of success, is living my why out loud every single day. Well, am I going to lay on my deathbed, thinking, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in that position.
Right.
Oh, and that's the way we all should strive to live that way. Tony Robbins said, "Don't should all over yourself," right? And I just love that because it's just so well. It's funny, first of all, because a little play on words, but it's so true, right? Going through life saying, I should have done this, should have done that. We should go do. No, geez, man, freaking go do it. So, yeah. Well, I tell you what, I'm gonna grab your dad's quote is what I learned, because I love that. I've heard it in different phrases and different words in the past, but I can just imagine that day that the career salesman walking up to the engineer and saying, because you're like, now I get to build stuff, and Dad saying, yeah, that's great, but can you sell it? And I think there's so much truth to that. So that's what I learned. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
So, in our conversation about fear, it actually brought me back to I listened to yesterday a podcast that Chael Sonnen was on, the UFC fighter, and he said something really interesting when they asked him about have you ever been scared going into a fight, and he said I've been scared going into every single fight. I fight killers. I fought Anderson Silva, John Jones. He throws out all these guys, and he says if I didn't feel scared going into it, I wouldn't have taken the fight. Because if you go into a fight knowing you're going to win, that's a bully mindset. And I think that goes a lot back to what we were talking about, a fear of steering into that fear of don't be a bully. Only a bully goes into a fight that they know only goes into fights that they know they can win. If you're really wanting to apply yourself to whatever it is, you should be picking fights that you can't always win because that's how you get better. And, that's how you challenge yourself. That's how it's fair. So I like that. And it really ties back into, I didn't think I'd be bringing Chael Sonnen up, but it really just ties back into that fear aspect.
Awesome. Andy, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
Well, you're going to take a page from me. I'm going to take a page from you with that whole coin trick. Flip it and cover the coin, and then just put it in your pocket. Never show it to them. That's something I learned. I'm going to take away from our conversation today. I like that.
Awesome. It's funny how something so simple can be so powerful, isn't it? Yeah. Well, hey, man, how do folks find you, follow you, get in contact with you?
Best place is my website, generateyourvalue.com. I do a podcast with a partner that Otis has already been a guest on our show. Great show earlier this season. So you can find the podcast there, or you can go out on any of the major platforms and find it. It's the same name, Generate Your Value. From that perspective, and I mentioned I'm a photographer, so I'm in the process of launching a photography website where I'll be selling my wares.
Awesome.
The address will be guyvphotography.com. Don't try and go and Google it today because it's not up and running at the time of this recording, but in the next month or so, I took my camera around with me as I traveled the world for Boeing and so forth, and people have been telling me for years, awesome. You need to sell this stuff, and I'm finally listening to them. Stepping out of that fear box and comfort zone. I've always enjoyed my photography for my own self and enjoyment, but stepping out and trying to sell it is another matter. So we'll see how that goes.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that because. All the places that you've been, if you're toting around the camera, man, that's going to be cool. So looking forward to that going live. Well, hey, man, we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day today to hang out with us. It's great to see you and learn from you and share some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I greatly appreciate the invite. And for your listening audience, when Otis came on to my podcast, I said, all right, family's in the house. And hopefully out of this conversation you understand now why we're family. You know?
Awesome, man. Thanks again. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Andy McDowell, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass it along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.